The fire roared like a beast, unleashed its glowing tendrils licking the edges of the crumbling building as smoke billowed into the night sky. Jake Matthews, the lieutenant of the Ridgeway Fire Department, barked orders through his radio, his voice cutting through the chaos. It was just another night on the job, or so he thought. The moment he stepped into the inferno, his heart stopped, not because of the heat or the danger, but because of the face staring back at him, pale and terrified. Through a cloud of smoke, her face, Samantha Carter, the woman he had loved more than life itself, the woman who had vanished from his world, without a trace 10 years ago, leaving nothing but an ache in his chest and unanswered questions. But now she was here standing in the middle of a burning building, her wide, tear-filled eyes locking onto his, as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The past came rushing back, like a tidal wave Jake had grown up in. Ridgeway, a small town where everyone knew everyone, and nothing seemed to change. He was the high school football captain, with big dreams of becoming a firefighter like his father. But none of that mattered. The day he met Samantha, she had just moved to Ridgeway with her father, a quiet man who worked as a mechanic at the local garage. Samantha was different from anyone Jake had ever known, intelligent, independent, and with a smile that could light up the darkest of days they first met on a crisp autumn afternoon at the local diner. Jake had stopped by with his friends after practice, his jersey slung over his shoulder, and his laughter filling the room. Samantha was sitting in a booth by the window, a book in her hands, and a mug of hot chocolate in front of her. "Who's that?" Jake asked. Nudging his friend, new girl. His friend replied with a shrug. "Heard, she just moved here." Jake didn't know what it was about her, but he couldn't look away before he knew it. He was walking over to her booth, his heart pounding like it never had before. "Hey," he said, his voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "I'm Jake. Mind if I sit?" She looked up from her book, her hazel eyes meeting his, and smiled sure. And just like that, something clicked between them. Their love story was the stuff of small-town legends. They spent their days exploring Ridgeway's hidden trails, sharing milkshakes at the diner, and lying beneath the stars, talking about their dreams. Jake wanted to become a firefighter and make his dad proud. Samantha dreamed of being a writer, of seeing the world beyond Ridgeway and filling it with stories. Only she could tell you'll be famous one day. Jake had told her one night, as they sat on the hood of his truck, parked on the ridge overlooking the town, "And I'll be the guy bragging to everyone that I knew you, before you were a big deal." Samantha laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And you'll be the bravest firefighter the world's ever seen," she said softly. For 2 years, they were inseparable. Everyone in town knew Jake, and Samantha were meant to be, and they couldn't imagine a future without each other. But that future never came. It happened on the night of their anniversary. Jake had spent weeks planning the perfect evening, a picnic, under the stars, complete with candles, music, and a small box tucked into his jacket pocket inside was the promise of forever. A simple gold ring with a tiny diamond he'd saved up for months to buy. But Samantha never showed. He waited for hours at their favorite spot, the candles burning down to stubs as the stars faded from the sky. When she didn't answer his calls, he drove to her house, only to find it dark and empty. Her father's truck was gone, and the place looked abandoned. She was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just an empty space where she used to be. Jake was devastated for months. He searched for answers, but no one knew where she had gone. Her father had left town as suddenly as she had, and there was no trace of either of them. Eventually, Jake had to accept the painful truth. Samantha was gone, and she wasn't coming back. He threw himself into his work, joining the fire department and following in his father's footsteps. But no matter how hard he tried to move on, he couldn't forget her. She haunted his dreams, her laughter echoing in the quiet moments, her smile forever etched into his memory. And now, 10 years later, here, she was Jake's Samantha, whispered her voice trembling as the fire raged around them. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All he could do was stare at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman before him with the ghost he had carried in his heart for so long. "Jake, please," she cried, snapping him out of his daze. He moved on instinct, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the exit. The smoke was thick, and the heat was suffocating. But Jake didn't let go. "He couldn't stay with me," he shouted as they made their way through the collapsing building, when they finally burst through the front door and into the cool night air. Samantha collapsed onto the ground, coughing violently. Jake knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he checked her for injuries. "Samantha," he said, his voice raw. "Are you okay?" She nodded weakly, her hazel eyes meeting his. You saved me," she whispered. "You disappeared," he said, his voice breaking. "You just left." Why, tears filled her eyes, and she looked away, her hands clutching at the fabric of her smoke-stained dress. It's complicated," she said softly. Jake's jaw tightened, his emotions swirling like the smoke that still lingered in the air. "Complicated. You were my whole world, Samantha, and you just vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice trembling. "What does that mean?" "He demanded you owe me the truth." Before she could answer, a paramedic approached, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We need to take her to the hospital," the paramedic said. Jake hesitated, his heart torn between wanting answers and making sure she was safe. "I'll come with you," he said finally, his voice firm. Samantha looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and something else, something he hadn't seen in years. Hope as the ambulance doors closed behind them. Jake couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the woman he loved, and what secrets had forced her to leave him behind. One thing was certain. This was far from over the ambulance ride, was filled with a tense silence. Samantha lay on the stretcher, her breathing still labored from the smoke inhalation, while Jake sat beside her, his eyes fixed on her, as if afraid she might vanish again. Every part of him burned with questions, with frustration, but he couldn't bring himself to push her while she was so fragile. Her face, though pale and smudged with soot, was still as beautiful as he remembered. But it wasn't just her face that haunted him. It was the way she had looked at him in the burning building. There was guilt in her eyes, as though she were carrying a weight far heavier than the flames around her. As the ambulance pulled into the hospital parking lot, Jake forced himself to focus on the present. Whatever answers she owed him, they could wait. Samantha was whisked away by the medical team, leaving Jake standing alone in the hallway. He ran a hand through his ash-streaked hair, the adrenaline of the rescue beginning to fade, placed by the ache of unresolved emotions. 10 years, for 10 years, he had searched for closure, replaying every moment of their time together in his mind, questioning what he could have done differently. And now, after all that time, she had fallen back into his life quite literally, through fire and smoke. But why now? And why had she left in the first place? "Jake," the sound of her voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned to see her standing in the doorway of her hospital room, wearing a thin hospital gown and an expression of hesitation. They said, "I'm okay to leave," she said quietly, avoiding his eyes. Just a bit of smoke inhalation. Nothing serious. He stepped closer, his boots echoing on the tile floor. "You shouldn't be leaving yet. You need rest." She shook her head. "I'll be fine. Where are you even going?" he asked, his voice sharper than he intended. She hesitated, clutching the doorframe. I'll figure it out." Jake's brow furrowed his frustration. Mounting, "Figure it out?" "Samantha, you just escaped a burning building. You have no place to go. Do you?" Her silence was answer enough. "Come on," he said finally, his voice softening. "You're coming with me." "What?" she asked, startled. "I'm not leaving you out there alone," he said firmly. "You stay at my place until we figure this out." She opened her mouth to protest, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't giving her a choice. The drive to Jake's apartment was tense, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. Samantha stared out the window, her fingers twisting in her lap, while Jake stole occasional glances at her, his grip tight on the steering wheel. It wasn't until they reached his small but tidy apartment that Samantha finally spoke. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. As she stood in the doorway, hesitant to step inside, Jake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't have to pull you out of that fire either." "But I did." She flinched at his words, and guilt flickered across her face. "I never wanted you to get hurt because of me," she whispered. Jake's jaw tightened. "Then tell me why you left, Samantha. Why did you disappear? Why did you shut me out of your life like I didn't matter?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, her voice trembling. "I didn't have a choice, Jake. I thought I was protecting you, protecting me from what he demanded, his frustration spilling over from what Samantha, I would have done anything for you. I loved you." "Stop," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jake fell silent, his chest heaving with emotion. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, but the pain in her voice stopped him cold. "I was protecting you from your mother," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake blinked, his anger giving way to confusion. "My mother?" Samantha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "She came to see me the night of our anniversary. She told me to leave you. She said that if I didn't, she would ruin my father's life, destroy his business, and make sure I was left with nothing." Jake stared at her, stunned what she said. "I wasn't good enough for you," Samantha continued, her voice trembling. "That I'd only hold you back. She told me you'd hate me if you knew the truth, and I believed her." Jake's fists clenched at his sides. "She threatened you." Samantha nodded, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "She left me no choice. Jake, I couldn't let her hurt you or my dad, so I left. I thought it was the only way to protect you." Jake felt as though the ground had been ripped out from under him. His mother, the woman he had trusted and admired, had torn apart the one thing that had meant the most to him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Why didn't you come to me?" She said. "You wouldn't believe me," Samantha whispered, and I was scared she was right. Jake turned away, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process what she was saying. The anger he felt toward his mother was a raging inferno inside him, but beneath it was an ache for the years they had lost, for the love that had been stolen from them. "I searched for you," he said finally, his voice raw. "4 months I searched. I thought you didn't love me anymore." Her sobs deepened and she covered her face with her hands. "I never stopped loving you, Jake," she said, her voice muffled. "Not for a single day." Jake turned back to her, his heart breaking at the sight of her tears. Slowly he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as she cried for a long moment. They stood there clinging to each other as the weight of the past crashed over them. That night, Samantha slept in Jake's bed while he took the couch, his mind racing as he stared at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about what she had told him about his mother's betrayal, about the sacrifices Samantha had made for him. He thought of all the nights he had spent alone, wondering where she had gone, and all the moments they had lost because of a lie. And as he lay there, his resolve hardened. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for their future. The next morning, Jake stood in the kitchen brewing coffee as Samantha walked in, looking hesitant but slightly more at ease. "Morning," he said, offering her a small smile. "Morning," she replied, her voice soft. He handed her a mug, their fingers brushing briefly, and for a moment the tension between them eased. But before either of them could speak, Jake's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at the screen, his jaw tightening when he saw the name, Mom. "What is it?" Samantha asked. Noticing the shift in his expression, Jake's eyes darkened. "I think it's time I got some answers of my own." Jake's heart pounded as he stared at the phone in his hand, his mother's name flashing across the screen like a warning. Samantha stood frozen across the kitchen, clutching her coffee mug, as if it were the only thing grounding her. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, her voice tinged with both fear and concern. "Yes, I do," Jake replied, his jaw tightening. "I deserve answers, Samantha. And so do you." He swiped to answer the call and put it on speaker, his voice cold as steel. "Mom, Jake," his mother, Evelyn Matthews, said on the other end, her voice warm and smooth, too smooth as if she weren't speaking to the son she had betrayed. "I've been trying to reach you. It's been days since we've spoken. I've been busy," Jake replied curtly. His tone clipped. There was a pause, and then Evelyn's tone shifted slightly. "Jake, is something wrong? You don't sound like yourself." Jake exchanged a glance with Samantha, who nodded hesitantly, taking a deep breath. He decided to go straight to the point. "Why did you threaten Samantha?" He asked, his voice steady, but laced with anger. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by silence. "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said finally, though her voice betrayed a faint tremor. "Don't lie to me," Jake said, his voice rising. "Samantha told me everything 10 years ago. You went to her and told her to leave me, or you destroy her father's life. You told her she wasn't good enough for me. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Jake. Evelyn began, her voice defensive. "I only did what I thought was best for you. Best for me." Jake's anger flared his grip, tightening on the phone. "You destroyed my life. You tore apart the one thing that made me happy, because you thought you knew what was best for me, Jake." "Listen to me," Evelyn said sharply, her tone hardening. "She would have held you back. You had a future, a chance to become the man you are today. I couldn't let you throw that away for some small town girl with no prospects." Samantha flinched at the words, tears filling her eyes as she turned away. Jake's fury burned even hotter as he stepped forward, his voice shaking with rage. "She wasn't just some girl," he snapped. "She was the woman I loved, and you took her away from me. You think I didn't see what was happening?" Evelyn continued, her tone cold. "You were so blinded by your feelings for her that you couldn't see the bigger picture. You had dreams, Jake dreams, that didn't include being tied down to someone who couldn't keep up with you. Jake's chest heaved, his breaths coming hard and fast. You don't get to decide what my dreams are, and you don't get to decide who I love. She left, didn't she? Evelyn said, her voice. I see if she really loved you, Jake. She would have stayed. She wouldn't have run at the first sign of trouble. That's enough. Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. She left because you gave her no choice. You lied to me. You manipulated her, and for what? To keep me under your control. Evelyn's silence was answer enough. I don't want to hear from you again. Jake said, his voice trembling with both anger and heartbreak. You don't get to be a part of my life until you can admit what you've done and apologize to Samantha. Jake Evelyn began, but he ended the call. Before she could say more for a moment, the room was silent, the weight of the confrontation hanging heavily in the air. Samantha set her coffee mug on the counter, her hands shaking. Jake, she said softly, her voice trembling. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said, turning to face her. For 10 years. She let me believe you walked away from me. She let me blame myself, question everything. I'm not letting her get away with that. Samantha shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But she's your mother. I don't want to be the reason you lose her. Jake stepped closer, his expression softening as he reached out to gently wipe away her tears. You're not the reason, Samantha. She made her choice now. I'm making mine. Her breath hitched, and she looked up at him, her eyes searching his. And what choice is that Jake's voice was steady as he said, you. It's always been you. Samantha's tears spilled over, but this time there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. Jake, I'm scared. What if this doesn't work? What if we're too broken to fix what we had? We're not broken, he said firmly. We've been through hell, but we're still standing, and I'm not giving up on us. Not now. Not ever. Samantha let out a shaky laugh, a smile breaking through her tears. I never stopped loving you, she whispered, and I never stopped loving you. Jake said, his voice raw with emotion. For the first time in 10 years, they allowed themselves to hope for the love they had lost and the future they might still have. But the road ahead was far from smooth. Jake's confrontation with his mother had set off a chain of events that neither of them could have anticipated. Evelyn, furious at being cut off, began to dig into Samantha's life, determined to find something, anything she could use to drive her out of Jake's life for good. Meanwhile, Samantha was struggling with her own demons. She had spent so many years believing she wasn't good enough for Jake, and though he had reassured her, the doubts lingered. I'm scared of ruining this, she admitted one evening as they sat on the couch. Ethan asleep in the next room. You're not going to ruin anything, Jake said, taking her hand in his. We're in this together. Samantha smiled faintly, but the worry in her eyes remained. The tension came to a head 2 weeks later, when Jake received an unexpected call from his fire chief. Matthews, the chief said gruffly. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? Jake asked, his stomach sinking. Someone's been spreading rumors about you and Samantha. The chief said, word is your mother's been talking to people around town, saying Samantha is just using you to get back on her feet, that she's unstable. Jake's blood ran cold. That's not true. I know it's not, the chief said, but the gossip's spreading. People are starting to question your judgment, especially after that fire where you rescued her. They're saying you were reckless, that you put the team at risk. Jake clenched his fists, fury coursing through him. His mother was trying to ruin him and Samantha all over again. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice tight. "You tell the truth," the chief said, "and you decide what matters most to you that night." Jake sat with Samantha on the couch, his hand tightly gripping hers, as he told her everything she's trying to tear us apart again. He said, his voice shaking with both anger and fear. Samantha's face paled, but she squared her shoulders, her voice steady. "We won't let her." Jake looked at her, his chest tightening with both love and admiration. "You're stronger than you think, Samantha. And so are you," she said, squeezing his hand. They knew the road ahead would be hard, but they were ready to face it together. Jake sat on the porch of his apartment that night, staring out into the darkened street, as 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. The events of the past 2 weeks had brought back emotions he thought he'd buried long ago. Love, heartbreak, and now a fury that burned hotter than any fire he'd ever faced. Evelyn, his mother, wasn't just meddling. She was systematically trying to dismantle everything he held dear: his career, his reputation, and most painfully, the fragile bond he had rebuilt with Samantha. He glanced behind him at the glow of the living room window inside. Samantha was sitting on the couch with Ethan reading him a bedtime story. Her soft voice filtered through the glass, and for a moment, the sight filled Jake with a sense of peace. But that peace was fleeting. He knew they were running out of time. The next morning, Jake made a decision. He wasn't going to let his mother continue to manipulate his life. From behind the scenes, he had spent too many years grieving what she'd stolen from him. And now that Samantha was back in his life, he wasn't going to lose her again. "Where are you going?" Samantha asked, as Jake pulled on his jacket and grabbed his keys to put an end to this. He said, his voice steady. Samantha stood, her brow furrowed in worry. "Jake, please don't do something you'll regret." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "The only thing I regret is not standing up for us 10 years ago. I let her manipulate me without even knowing it, and I'm not making that mistake again." She nodded reluctantly, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. "Be careful." Jake pressed a kiss to her forehead, always when Jake arrived at his mother's home. His heart was pounding with a mix of anger and determination. The sprawling colonial house where he'd grown up now felt cold and uninviting, a far cry from the place he once called home. Evelyn opened the door, her sharp features tightening when she saw him. "Jake," she said, her tone cool, "I wasn't expecting you. We need to talk," Jake said, stepping past her into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. Evelyn closed the door behind him, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she followed him into the living room. "If this is about Samantha, it is," Jake said, turning to face her, his gray eyes blazing. "I know what you've been doing, spreading lies about her, trying to ruin her reputation, trying to ruin mine." Evelyn crossed her arms, her expression icy. "I'm protecting you, Jake. You're too blinded by your feelings for that girl to see what's best for you. What's best for me," Jake repeated, his voice rising. "Do you even hear yourself? You tore us apart once, and now you're trying to do it again. But this time, I'm not letting you." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "She's not good for you. She's never been good for you. Do you think I wanted to hurt you?" "Jake, I did what I had to do because I love you, because I wanted to see you succeed." Jake shook his head, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You don't love me. Mom, you love controlling me. You think you know what's best for everyone, but all you've ever done is push people away. Dad left because of you. didn't he?" Evelyn flinched, but she quickly recovered her eyes. "Narrowing your father left, because he was weak. He couldn't handle the pressure of this family, of the responsibilities we carry. And now, you're letting a woman like Samantha pull you down, the same way Jake's voice dropped cold and firm. Don't you dare blame Dad for this. And don't you dare talk about Samantha like that. She's the strongest person I've ever known. She's been through hell because of you, and she still found the courage to come back." Evelyn's face paled, and for a moment the mask of control she always wore seemed to crack. "Jake, please. I was trying to protect you." "No," Jake said, cutting her off. "You were trying to protect your image, but I don't care about that anymore. I care about Samantha. I care about Ethan. And if you can't accept that, then you don't get to be a part of my life." Evelyn stared at him, her expression a mix of anger and something that looked almost like fear. "You're choosing her over your own mother." Jake's voice was steady as he said, "I'm choosing happiness, something you'll never understand." Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, slamming shut behind him when Jake returned home. Samantha was waiting for him, her hands twisting nervously in front of her. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake stepped closer, his expression softening as he took her hands in his. "It's over," he said. "Shek not going to hurt us anymore." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "Jake, I don't want to come between you and your family. I never wanted this." "You didn't come between us," Jake said firmly. "She did, and she made her choice now. I'm making mine." Samantha let out a shaky breath, her tears spilling over as she leaned into him. "I don't deserve you." Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly. "You deserve everything, Samantha, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." But even as they tried to move forward, the scars of the past lingered. Jake returned to work at the fire department, only to find that the rumors Evelyn had spread were still circulating. Some of his colleagues looked at him differently, their trust in him shaken by the gossip. "I know you've got a lot going on," his fire chief said one afternoon as they stood in the station's garage. "But you need to put this to rest, Jake. You're a damn good firefighter, but this drama is starting to affect the team." Jake nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll handle it, Chief." He knew what he had to do. A week later, Jake and Samantha stood hand in hand on the stage of Ridgeway's community center, facing a crowd of reporters and townspeople who had gathered for a press conference. "Are you sure about this?" Samantha whispered, her grip on his hand tightening. Jake nodded, his eyes steady. "It's time we tell our story." As the crowd settled, Jake stepped forward, his voice calm but firm as he spoke into the microphone. "My name is Jake Matthews, and I'm here to set the record straight." He began. "For the past few weeks, there have been rumors circulating about my personal life. Rumors that have hurt the people I care about most. I won't stand by and let those lies define me or the woman I love." He turned to Samantha, his voice softening. "This is Samantha Carter. She's not just someone I rescued from a fire. She's the woman I've loved since I was 18 years old. 10 years ago, we were torn apart by circumstances beyond our control, but fate brought us back together, and I'm not letting her go again." Samantha's eyes filled with tears as Jake reached for her hand, holding it tightly. "To those who doubt me, who doubt us," Jake continued, his voice strong, "I have nothing to hide. I'm proud of the choices I've made, and I'm proud to stand beside this woman together. We've faced the flames, both literal and figurative, and we've come out stronger. The crowd erupted into applause, and as Jake turned to Samantha, she smiled through her tears, her heart full for the first time in years. In the weeks that followed, the rumors began to fade, replaced by admiration for Jake's courage and honesty. The fire department rallied behind him, and the town slowly came to see Samantha not as a scandal, but as the strong, resilient woman she truly was. And for the first time in a decade, Jake and Samantha began to build the future they had dreamed of so long ago. Together, life in Ridgeway slowly began to return to normal, though for Jake and Samantha, it was anything but ordinary. The press conference had been a turning point, a declaration of their love, and a firm stand against the shadows of the past. The rumors began to fade, and people's perspectives shifted instead of whispers of scandal. There was talk of admiration for Jake's bravery and Samantha's resilience, but healing wasn't instantaneous. The scars from the years apart, the betrayals and the doubts were still fresh, and it would take time for them to rebuild the trust and confidence they'd once shared. One warm Saturday morning, Jake took Ethan to the firehouse for a tour. It had been weeks since the press conference, and Jake felt the need to give the boy a glimpse into his world, into the part of himself that had been forged in Samantha's absence. Ethan was practically bouncing with excitement as Jake led him into the massive garage, where the fire trucks gleamed in the sunlight. Whoa, Eth exclaimed, his eyes widening as he took in the towering red trucks, the hoses coiled neatly on their sides, and the polished helmets resting on hooks. Jake chuckled, kneeling down beside him. Pretty cool. Huh, it's awesome, Ethan said, his small hands gripping Jake's as he looked around in awe. A few of Jake's colleagues walked by, nodding and greeting, their expressions softer than they had been in weeks. The ice that had formed after the rumors had started was beginning to melt, and Jake felt a glimmer of relief as Ethan climbed up into the driver's seat of one of the trucks. Jake stood back watching him with a mixture of pride and affection. "Looks like he's having a great time," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to see his fire chief, a stocky man with a weathered face and kind eyes, standing with his arms crossed. "He is—" Jake said, a small smile tugging at his lips. The chief nodded, his gaze steady. "You've done good, Jake. Not just for him, but for yourself. I know the last few weeks haven't been easy, but you handled it like a pro." "Thanks, Chief," Jake said, his chest swelling with gratitude. "And for what it's worth," the chief added, clapping a hand on Jake's shoulder, "we've all got your back. Don't forget that." Jake nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He watched as Ethan climbed down from the truck, running back to him with a grin that could light up the whole firehouse Mom's going to love. "This," Ethan said excitedly. Jake smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Yeah, she will back at Jake's apartment." Samantha was preparing lunch when she heard the sound of the door opening. She turned to see Jake and Ethan walk in, both of them smiling from ear to ear. "How was it?" she asked. Setting down the plate she was holding, "It was amazing, Mom," Ethan exclaimed, running over to her. "Mr. Jake showed me the fire trucks, and I got to sit in one. It was so cool." Samantha laughed, scooping him into her arms. "That does sound pretty cool." Jake leaned against the counter, watching them with a warmth in his eyes that made Samantha's heart flutter. "You should come next time," he said, his voice soft. "It's part of my world, and I want you to be a part of it too." Samantha's smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly recovered. "I'd like that," she said quietly. Jake stepped closer, his hand resting lightly on her waist. "We're a team now. Samantha, you don't have to feel like you're on the outside anymore." Her eyes searched his, and she nodded her walls, slowly beginning to crumble. But while Jake and Samantha worked to rebuild their lives together, Evelyn Matthews was still fuming after Jake's explosive confrontation with her. Evelyn had retreated to her own home, licking her wounds and plotting her next move. She couldn't believe her son had chosen that girl over his own mother. It was unthinkable, but Evelyn wasn't the type to back down easily. She had spent her life cultivating her image, ensuring that the Matthews name was synonymous with respect and success, and she wasn't about to let Samantha Carter, a girl she deemed unworthy, ruin. "Everything, I'll fix this," Evelyn muttered to herself as she pored over a stack of papers in her study. Among them were records, reports, and even a few photos she had dug up from Samantha's past. She was determined to find something, anything that would prove Samantha didn't belong in Jake's life. And when she found it, she knew exactly how to use it. The storm hit. 3 days later, Jake was at the firehouse when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He frowned as he opened it, his stomach dropping when he saw the headline, "Scandal Uncovered, Samantha Carter's Family Secrets Exposed." His hands trembled as he read the article, which detailed personal and painful details about Samantha's past, her father's financial struggles, her time living in a rundown motel after she left Ridgeway, and even a fabricated claim that she had been involved in a string of petty crimes. Jake's blood boiled as he scrolled through the article, knowing exactly who was behind it. Evelyn. He slammed his phone down and grabbed his jacket, his mind racing as he thought of Samantha and Ethan. When Jake arrived at his apartment, he found Samantha sitting on the couch, staring blankly at her phone. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. "Samantha," Jake said, rushing to her side. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. "It's all over the internet, Jake. Everyone knows." Jake knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me. None of this matters. None of it is true. But people will believe it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Your friends, your colleagues, they'll think I'm a burden, that I'm dragging you down Jake's heart." HAD, as he cued her face in his hands. "Hey, look at me," he said firmly. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I know the truth, and that's all that matters. We'll get through this together." Samantha nodded, but the fear in her eyes remained. Just then, Ethan walked into the room holding a drawing he'd been working on Mom. "Are you okay?" Samantha quickly wiped her tears and forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart." Ethan frowned, looking up at Jake. Did something bad happen? Jake knelt down to Ethan's level, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Everything's okay, buddy. We're just figuring some things out." Ethan nodded, though his eyes were filled with concern. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Jake made another decision. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in weeks, when Evelyn answered, her voice as cold and composed as ever. Jake didn't waste any time. "You crossed the line," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know you're behind that article, and I won't let you get away with it." "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn replied, though there was a hint of satisfaction in her tone. "Stay away from Samantha and Ethan," Jake warned. "If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. Do you really want your perfect reputation ruined?" Evelyn was silent for a moment, and Jake could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind. "You've changed, Jake," she said finally, her voice. "I know. Mom," he replied, "I finally found myself, and for the first time in my life, I'm happy. You're not taking that away from me without waiting for a response." He ended the call, his resolve stronger than ever in the days that followed. Jake and Samantha faced the fallout together. The town rallied around them, many people seeing through Evelyn's smear campaign and offering their support. And slowly but surely, Samantha began to believe in herself again. Jake stood by her every step of the way, proving with every word, every gesture, and every moment of quiet reassurance that their love was worth fighting for. They had faced the fire, and together they had come out stronger. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the chaos surrounding Jake and Samantha began to subside. The article Evelyn had planted had caused ripples of doubt at first, but Jake's unwavering support and the respect he built within Ridgeway over the years silenced most of the gossip the town rallied behind him, and Samantha proving that even in a world where whispers and rumors traveled fast, truth and love carried greater weight. Still, Samantha couldn't help but feel the weight of everything they'd been through the years, apart the lies, the betrayal. It all lingered like a shadow over the happiness they were working so hard to rebuild one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Jake found her sitting on the back porch of his apartment, lost in thought. "You've been quiet today," he said softly, stepping outside and handing her a warm cup of tea. Samantha looked up at him, her lips curving into a faint smile, just thinking Jake sat beside her, his presence grounding her as he gazed out at the horizon. What about us?" She admitted. "About everything we've been through." He nodded his jaw, tightening slightly. "It's been a lot," he said, "more than anyone should have to go through, but we survived it," she said, her voice soft. "And sometimes I can't believe we did." Jake reached for her hand, his callous fingers brushing against hers. "We survived because we're stronger together," he said. "No matter what happens, I'll always fight for you, Samantha. I'll always fight for us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she turned to face him fully, her voice trembling as she said, "I spent so many years believing I wasn't good enough for you. Your mother made sure I felt that way. And even now, there's a part of me that wonders if I deserve this, if I deserve you." Jake's chest tightened at her words, and he CED'd her face in his hands, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Samantha," he said, his voice steady and filled with conviction, "you are the best thing that's ever happened to me, and you've always deserved this, deserved love, happiness, and everything good this world has to offer. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, her heart aching with both love and gratitude. "I love you, Jake," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied, his voice breaking slightly, as he pressed his forehead against hers. For the first time in years, Samantha felt a sense of peace. The walls she had built around her heart were finally coming down, and she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future filled with love and hope. The next morning, Jake surprised Samantha and Ethan with a trip to one of Ridgeway's most beloved spots, a quiet meadow just outside of town, where wildflowers bloomed in every color, and a small stream trickled through the grass. Ethan ran ahead laughing as he chased butterflies and splashed in the shallow water. Samantha watched him with a smile, her heart full as she sat on the blanket Jake had laid out for them. "This is beautiful," she said, glancing at Jake as he sat beside her. "Not as beautiful as you," he said, his tone teasing but sincere. She laughed, nudging him playfully. "You're terrible at compliments. You know that. I'm just being honest," he replied, grinning as they sat together, the breeze rustling through the trees and the sun warming their faces. Jake reached into his jacket pocket, his heart pounding Samantha. He began, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. She turned to him, her brows furrowing slightly. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, pulling out a small velvet box and opening it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. Samantha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I've spent 10 years wondering what could have been." Jake said, his voice steady, despite the emotion in his eyes. "And now that you're back, I don't want to waste another second. Samantha Carter, will you marry me?" She stared at him, her heart racing as 1,000 emotions washed over her. Joy, disbelief, love. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder. "Yes, Jake, 1,000 times. Yes." Jake's face broke into a smile as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and Samantha threw her arms around his neck, holding him tightly, as tears streamed down her face. Ethan, who had been watching from the stream, ran over, his eyes wide with excitement. "Are you getting married?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. Samantha laughed, pulling him into the hug. "Yes, sweetheart, we're getting married." Ethan grinned. "Does that mean Mr. Jake is going to be my dad?" Jake's throat tightened and he looked at Samantha, who nodded, her eyes shining with love. "If that's okay with you, buddy." Jake said, his voice soft. Ethan threw his arms around Jake, hugging him tightly. "It's more than okay." He said the weeks that followed were a whirlwind of joy and celebration. The town of Ridgeway embraced Jake and Samantha's love story, and even those who had doubted them couldn't help but admire their resilience. Evelyn, however, remained a distant shadow in their lives. Despite Jake's warnings, she made no further attempts to interfere, though her absence left a bitter-sweet ache in Jake's heart. "I wish things could have been different," he admitted one evening, as he and Samantha sat together on the porch. Samantha rested her head on his shoulder, her hand in his. "Maybe one day she'll see the truth," she said softly. "But until then, we have everything we need right here." Jake nodded, his heart full, as he looked at the woman he loved and the family they were building together on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by the golden leaves and the people who mattered most to them. Jake and Samantha exchanged vows in a small but beautiful ceremony in Ridgeway's meadow. As they stood beneath the canopy of trees, looked into Samantha's eyes, his voice steady, as he said, "You are my past, my present, and my future. No matter what we face, I will always choose you." Tears filled Samantha's eyes as she replied, "You saved me, Jake. Not just from that fire, but from myself. You gave me hope, love, and a home. I will love you for the rest of my life." When they kissed, the crowd erupted into cheers, and Ethan ran up to join them, wrapping his arms around both of them. For the first time in years, Jake and Samantha felt whole, and as they stood together, surrounded by love and laughter, they knew they had risen from the ashes stronger than ever together as a family,